Hello again and welcome back to the DMAIC Define Phase Module 2. And in this module we're going to dive a little deeper into the main deliverables, if you will, of the Define Phase. And I've called this module the Define Phase Checklist. So let's roll our sleeves up and get stuck straight in. Okay, something that we covered within the Foundations Masters series, and that is the definition of a process. I think it's important that you and I now cover that in perhaps a little more detail so it's absolutely clear. Now in Module 1 I said that the define phase is about understanding the problem, and that problem will normally involve one or more processes. So a process therefore is a series of steps and actions or activities, if you will, that produce an output, usually in the form of a product or a service. This, if you will, is your deliverable and should ideally add value in the eyes of the customer, remembering that customers may be internal or external. So the model looks something like this. Here's the process, and we have inputs from suppliers and outputs to customers. Again, be clear that your customers may be internal and external, and the same goes for suppliers. So suppliers, therefore, in the general sense, provide something. The process then does something with that, and the output is then delivered to customers. But there are some common elements around each process. Generally, these will consist of standards, the relevant knowledge and skills from those involved, along with their experience, the carrying out of procedures, the environment, and information. And what that looks like is therefore the people, equipment, method, material, and the environment. And this is known as PMI. And if you think about it, all work that you do within an organization is in fact in the form of a process. And of course, I'm referring to a process here, but there may be multiple processes that you're mapping here. So it might look something like this, and these may be multiple processes, either in series or parallel, or in some combination. So let's look at the people, equipment, method, material, and environment in a little more detail. Here's our process down here with inputs and outputs and the key elements which I'll now discuss. Starting with people. These of course are those working in or around the process. What we need here is the right number of people with the right levels of knowledge along with their skills and experience in order to work within each process. It's worth pointing out here that if the people involved with the process don't have the necessary knowledge and skills, then appropriate training might need to be delivered. Next up, equipment. And this covers the various items needed to carry out the work within that process or processes. What we need to do here is ensure that we've got the right facilities and equipment and they have the capabilities in order to get the job done. So you see, these equipment and facilities are needed to operate the process. And such equipment and facilities need to be capable of meeting or exceeding the customer requirements. And these must be appropriate from day one. They must be located in the right place and correctly maintained from that point on. Next up is the method. You obviously need clear process and procedures describing how the work gets done, how the work is agreed, how it's documented, and how all of those are kept current and up to date. Next up are materials. Now, generally we refer to materials being consumed or used in some way to create your products or services or in the carrying out of the process. So materials are all those things necessary to do the work. Then we have the environment, and this covers the working area within which the process is used. So we need to ensure that the environment is appropriate for the activity. An example here would be that the process has the right workspace to carry out the process. But most practitioners realize that there's more than just 5 elements to a process, and it's that all-important information. So having the right information to carry out the process. You could therefore see that your PEM acronym is extended to PEMI. And it's worth just mentioning that when it comes to procedures, these should be simple to follow and understand. Here, clear language and diagrams help to ensure that they're used to good effect. And when it comes to standards, it makes sense to properly describe all relevant standards needed within the process. These too may form part of the method. For example, the application of regulatory requirements or service level agreements SLAs that need to be followed. And just like procedures, standards should be documented in an easily accessible manner. So let's now go through our DMAIC Define Phase review checklist. First of all, let's talk about the problem statement. Here, we're ensuring focus is on the symptoms only and includes problem details, such as the when and the what, its magnitude, its impact or consequence. We'll mention more of that shortly. The key word here is symptoms only. We should make no attempt to come up with a solution at this early juncture. Who are the key stakeholders? And exactly how will they be involved? And how will you, within the Lean Six Sigma project, communicate progress to them? The business impact. I touched on this in Module 1. What are the expected financial benefits? And are there any assumptions that have been made and captured? A list of the team members. Who are your key stakeholders? Have you got the right mix of skills and knowledge of the current process? Bearing in mind, this DMAIC project will almost certainly modify and improve the process in some way, and it may well be that you'll need a different mix of skills and knowledge. But for now, we're only interested in the process as it currently is. Produce a high-level project plan showing targeted completion date and intermediate milestones. Like I said earlier, that although Lean Six Sigma isn't about project management, it will certainly use projects as the vehicle for change, and therefore, at this early juncture, after all we're only in the define phase, then it can only be a high-level project plan that could be created. And therefore, with our first estimates of a completion date and intermediate milestones, as a minimum, the start and finish of each of the phases of DMAIC. Continuing, the verification of project scope, what's in and what's out. This needs to be broad enough to achieve the objectives, yet narrow enough to be completed in time. In other words, to meet your time frame. Project scope is potentially one of the big killers of any project. You've probably heard of the phrase scope creep. Well, this is where, during the life of the project, gradually small elements are bolted onto the scope, making the coverage, if you will, of the project bigger and bigger. And of course, as scope increases from what was originally agreed, it does so insidiously, day by day, until the point when you realise that the project is now going to be late and over budget, simply because the scope has been made larger, otherwise known as scope creep. Then we have the goal statement. If you recall from the foundations, we had the breakthrough equation. This is identification of the key output metric, the Y of the breakthrough equation, that needs to be improved as a result of delivering this project. Then we have several key sets of documentation within the define phase. And here I mention a few of them just as a high-level list. And we'll go into most of these in more detail as the define phase continues. The voice of the customer, something called a Kano method, communication plan, the measured requirements, critical to quality, the SIPOC diagram, and along with typical project management elements, the Gantt chart, stakeholder list, risk plan, and so on. Now, in Module 1, I mentioned that the project charter is first created as a draft by the sponsors and used as an input into the define phase. Throughout the DMAIC define phase, up to the end of it, the project charter will be refined, updated, and eventually will need to be approved and signed off. So let's now look at a typical structure of the project charter. First, the easy bit, name of the project, and the date it was started. The project charter should also include the answer to the question, why? This is the high-level business case describing why this project is important, and importantly, how it aligns with business plans and strategies. Clearly, we don't want to be carrying out projects which are not relevant to the organisation running them. Next up is the what. This is the problem statement and the goal statement. This includes the scope, what's in and what's out, and the critical to quality requirements and defect definitions. We covered that in the foundations, you recall, for the relevant customers and processes concerned. So we'll be looking at things like this, creating a problem statement, a goal statement, a definition of the defect or defects, the customer's critical to quality requirements, and scope, using something called in-frame and out-of-frame. More of that shortly. Then we come to the who. This will refer to the process owner, the champion, team leader and team members. The charter should state who are they and what are their roles, responsibilities, and how much time commitment do we need from each. For example, what involvement is expected of the project champion, and how often should they meet. Bringing us to the when. And this will be the high-level timeframes for the DMAIC phases. That's a good place to pause, and in the next module, Module 3, you and I will start investigating the range of process tools used within the define phase. So from me, Dave, thanks for your time and attention, and I look forward to your company again in Module 3. So, bye for now.